Serious, NSW, Redditors who've had a stalker. What happened? Not a scary stalker, but I thought he was interesting. I used to work at an adult store and a guy named Rob claimed to be from out of town. He'd come in and buy DVDs, then come back the next day and give them to me, every day, for 3 months. I gave the DVDs to friends, threw some away, kept a couple, but Jesus, he bought at least one copy of every major movie we had. He was very nice and I think just lonely. Rob would just hang out in the store and tell me about himself for hours. He knew my schedule, and once during finals week I had to take a few days off. He apparently went nuts in the store because no one would tell him where I was. No violence, just yelling and angry. It was weird the last time I saw him after giving my 2 weeks notice. He begged me not to take another job. So I don't know if he's really a stalker, per se, but he was around more than my boyfriend at the time. It sounds like he was a stalker and you were just totally chill about it. More mild than some, but I did have a guy somewhat stalk me before. I worked as a CSR in a bank and one of the customers started to have a weird interest in me. He was about 20 years older than me and he'd wait in line specifically for me and even wait until I was off my break so that he could come to my till. He eventually started asking me out for lunch and such, and I would try to gently let him down saying that I had a boyfriend, but he'd continue to leave his number every time. This escalated to him saying inappropriate things like how I probably gave good head and weird crap like that. He started calling the bank line around 20 times a day asking for me. My coworkers were super cool though and always told him that I couldn't talk and started watching out for him and would tell me to hide when he would be coming in. He started showing up in tuxes and if I wasn't there he would start yelling and swearing. My boss ended up telling him to frick off and actually closed his account there. We called the RCMP and it turned out that the guy had actually been arrested before for stalking and kidnapping. I didn't ever hear from him again after they closed his account, so I think I dodged a bullet. Still freaky as crap. I currently have a stalker. He's just terribly bad at it. I think he watches TV shows about stalkers to get ideas. Most recently he tried to fill the lock on my front door with glue. A syringe full of acetone fixed that, no problem. Mostly he makes copious social media accounts and tries to catfish me, but it is always extremely obvious that it is him. Most notably, he hit me up pretending to be a guy with a really small penis, and bragging about it, because he thought I was into that, for some reason. From some of these accounts, he demanded that I send him pornographic photos and videos, and when I didn't comply he posted all of my personal information online, like my address and stuff. I don't know where. I never looked for it. All that happened from it was that about 15 good Samaritans sent me messages along the lines of, "Hey, your butthole ex-boyfriend posted your contact info online." Nothing bad ever came of it. He routinely tries to report me to the police for trivial things as part of his stalking. Most recently he filed a complaint because I had put a note on my door explaining that anyone who got my contact information online had not actually been in contact with me, just in case anyone showed up. So he complained about a note on my door that he caused me to need to put there, and the only way he could have seen it was by coming by my place to spy on me. Like I said, not too bright. I printed out everything he did, the catfishing, the threats, the messages I got from Good Samaritans, and turned it over to the police. They are currently building a case. I've posted this a while back before. I had this stalker throughout high school. She would claim we were dating even when I already had a girlfriend. I'm Asian and she was obsessed with them. We had one conversation once and we asked basic questions to get to know each other, and every answer she gave was related to Asians. The creepiest thing she did was give me an envelope and told me not to open it until I got home, but of course I opened it right then and there. Inside were pages of creepy stuff about me. She'd have creepy love letters. She had a page of graph paper in there that had my name written in every single square front and back. She had drawings of me. One of the drawings she had was a picture of me and her making out in the hallway and my then girlfriend watching us and crying in the background. I told her to back off after that. And sorry, I don't have any pictures of the drawings. She asked for the envelope back a couple days later. This was not quite 10 years ago, but it happened my sophomore year of college. I was dating someone at the time. Turned out to be a real craphead, but that's another story. And he introduced me to one of his really close friends at this party we went to. His friend just falls in love with me right then and there. I mean, it was blatantly obvious. He would just stare at me no matter who was talking, keep trying to initiate conversations with me, ask me a bunch of questions, but not even give anyone else the opportunity to join in on conversations. My now ex BF didn't think anything of it and laughed it off. I kept feeling really creeped and weirded out. I dunno, I had this gut feeling something was just not right. Well, a week goes by and he texts me. I don't know his number, so I ask how he got it. My dumbass boyfriend gave it to him because the friend said he had an important question. Fine, I'll answer his question and move on. His question was whether I was serious about my boyfriend. So I stopped responding. Now here's where things get crazier. He would keep texting me all day long at all hours of the day. I mean, it was ridiculous. I figured he'd eventually stop, so I'd ignore him or be like Kay and hope he'd get the hint. Nope. When he realized I wouldn't text back, he started calling. He'd call from his number and anyone else who had a cell phone. He'd even call me from my ex's phone. WTF. I told my BF to tell him to stop since it's his friend, but he just brushed it off like, he just wants to be your friend, give him a chance. So I decided to tell him, listen, you seem like a nice guy and all, but can you please stop messaging and calling me? He seemed to understand, but maybe he only heard the "you seemed like a nice guy" part because he moved into my apartment complex the weekend after. I'd begin to see him outside my window and sometimes he'd just show up at my door and knock to hang out. I started getting freaked out, so I called the cops on him. The officers were really nice and gave him a call to stop harassing me. Apparently he didn't believe the officers, thought they were fake, and came to my apartment again to confront me. I called the police again and they came to my home immediately. I'm not sure what happened after that, but I didn't have to get a restraining order. I did let my apartment management office know, but as far as I know they didn't take any actions either. Once he stopped contacting me, I just wanted to move on. This was all in a period of 4 months. This happened to me from summer 2013 to spring 2014. It actually took me a really long time to even notice that anything was happening. For reference, I am a guy. The first time I noticed anything weird was when I noticed some of my clothing had disappeared. This happened twice that I can remember. An article that was in my closet just wasn't there. I was in the military at the time and it was my uniforms which were going missing. At first, there were a few other things which were always small enough for me to brush them off, such as finding my door open. Eventually, things got a little weirder. I lived alone, and one day I came home to see my pad of sticky notes on my kitchen counter. Hello was written on top in very sloppy handwriting. My boyfriend was visiting me at the time, and I thought he must have written it, but he denied it. After realizing this, I started thinking something was up, and he decided to stay with me in my apartment. Things escalated a bit, and I made several reports to the police, had my locks changed, set up a camera. I never caught anyone, and the person still got into my apartment. They took a copy of my work schedule, which I foolishly left on my desk. They took several pairs of underwear, and left 1 or 2 weird notes. By the time January rolled around, we were sick of it, and decided to move. I got a house a few miles away, secured it as best I could, set up cameras and alarms, and for a few weeks had peace. Then one day I came home from work to find a pair of my underwear on my front doorstep. Frick, the same crap started happening again, with the person evading my cameras and getting inside. One day I came back to a note on my whiteboard which read, surprise. One time there was a knot held up to my camera. One time there was one stuck on my car windshield. They never said much, and they never made any real sense, or were overtly threatening. It was all just harassment. The worst thing that happened was one night while I was at work, I got an email. In it was a photo of my boyfriend sleeping, taken from inside the house. It was captioned, "Don't wake him." That was one of the worst nights of my life, as I called the police and hope he wasn't dead. Sure enough, when they got there, the person was long gone. Eventually, the police basically told me I was lying, and to stop calling them, and threatened to prosecute me. I left the military and moved to a different state not long after. The last note I got read, "I am going to miss you," and I haven't heard anything since. No big reveal, no closure, and that's it. I was sort of stalked, but it was more like sexual harassment. Either way it creeped me the frick out. After I graduated college I started working in sales for this huge multinational company. I was one of the only girls and the youngest by a lot. Half the people on my sales team were older than my parents. This guy on another team who was in his 40s would always hang out around my desk and try to teach me his sales tricks. At first I thought this is great, but I quickly changed my mind. He got creepier and creepier, saying things like how he likes my breasts and talking about sex all the time. I brought it up to some other co-workers because I was really uncomfortable, but this was my first job in a corporate setting and I didn't know if that was normal or acceptable. They agreed it was creepy but just laughed it off. I made sure to mention it to my boss, just so that it was on the record in case it ever escalated. This went on for a few months and then my boyfriend and I were planning on going away for our anniversary to a casino the next state over and I, who had never gambled before, was talking to some co-workers asking for tips. The creepy guy overhears and decides to follow me to the casino for the weekend. I had had enough so I talked to my boss about it who was nice but just said he'd try to keep us apart. A few weeks later, everyone was at lunch and I was alone in the office on the phone with a client. The guy came up behind me and put his hand down my dress. I was so freaked out, but I was on the phone with a customer so I didn't know what to do. I couldn't say anything. He gave me this creepy smile then just walked away. I called my boss and he just said how sorry he was that this happened but that was it. I asked him to call HR for me as a witness because I had reported this man before and his response was, "Are you really that upset about it?" He basically refused to help me so I called HR myself. They ended up firing him, but people in the office were pissed. He had been there for 15 years and had put up pretty good sales numbers. Then they took almost my whole sales territory and my biggest clients away. They say there's no repercussions for reporting this kind of activities but there obviously was. I ended up quitting soon after because I was so disgusted by it. I heard that he got fired from the job he got after for sexual harassment too. I don't know how long ago this was, but that kind of punishment for reporting sexual harassment is illegal. Highly. He was a really messed up vulnerable guy that had anger problems. He needed to be best friends, but had too many issues for me. When he moved away I deleted his number and just iced him out. Then he cyber stalked me and ripped off some work I did. He freaked out at my then girlfriend online. Then he moved back and started following me. Still cyber stalked me. Tried to get me fired. Showed up everywhere angrily. I mean everywhere. I knew where it was heading. Finally I confronted him with a bunch of friends as a last ditch before I went to the cops. And he started crying. It was real awkward and real sad. He was just messed up and lonely guy. I was one of his only friends and I just backed off right when he moved out for the first time to a city where he didn't know anyone. And he didn't know how to handle it. He did some crazy stalker crap, but I felt like I kind of was crueler than I'd like to admit in response. I didn't see or hear from him for many years. One day I just suddenly remembered his number. I hold the belief that I should apologize if I know I did wrong, even if the other party did something and isn't sorry. I sent him a text wishing him well, and apologized for my end of the wrongdoing. Surprisingly, it was still his number, and he responded with an equally heartfelt apology. He got into therapy, made new friends, and learned how to have human interaction and self-confidence. We actually talked for a long time. And he totally was a different and better person. We actually became friends again. Really good friends for the last few years. He was just an awkward guy with messed up parents that needed some help sorting his crap out. I do not recommend contacting your stalker, and I don't know why I thought it was okay for me to do so, but I'm glad to know everything is okay in my story. Glad to have a story with a happy ending. About 4 years ago, I agreed to a date with a guy. We went on one date to eat at Chili's, and then to a movie after. It wasn't much of a date, nor did I think we clicked, so I generally just started to not respond to texts. He decided to show up at my work consecutive days in a row and texted me multiple times per day. I eventually texted him back saying I wasn't interested, but it didn't go over well with him. He kept showing up to my work and my house at random, which was very creepy. At one point he let himself into my house and sat in the living room for 3 hours waiting for me. I was locked in my bedroom hiding. A few days after that, he stayed at my work for over 6 hours. just waiting for me to get off work. He parked his car right next to mine and just waited. Once I got off, I ran to my car, and he tried to approach me. I sped off. He tried to follow me, and I lost him. Then, when I pulled up to my house, he was in his car waiting. I circled my neighborhood and left, and he followed me up until the point I pulled into the police station. Then he sped off. I ended up getting an excellent cop to work with me. He sat down with me, looked up this guy to make sure he didn't have a record, and then called the guy and left him a very threatening message telling him to cut contact with me, or he would throw him in jail. He did an excellent job scaring the guy off, and even periodically called to check on me and make sure the stalker wasn't messing with me still. A few years later, the stalker contacted me through Facebook saying that he was willing to forget the entire thing and start over again with me. Nope. I had a guy become obsessed with me. I think he found me on Facebook or something and he started messaging me like crazy. According to his page, he was 18. He started saying some creepy crap like what he wanted to do to me, how he wanted to be my boyfriend and give me gifts and crap. I ignored his messages and thought that was it. The dude starts messaging my brother and tries to get him to tell me to talk to this guy. Then the guy added me on Skype, then on LinkedIn. Then I got emails with some pictures attached that I dared not open. Then I got texts from him telling me he was sorry for being so annoying but he was a chubby chaser and loved big guys and could I come see him because he was in the hospital. I blocked him on everything I could and told my brother to as well. My brother found all this hilarious but I was freaked out. I realized a quick Google search was enough for him to pull up all my usernames for various sites, some of which had my phone number, and I quickly rectified that. I thought it was over, but then the guy messaged my, at the time, girlfriend, and despite the fact she too thought it was hilarious, she chewed him out and I haven't heard from him since. It was a really creepy experience. This worries me. Everyone vilifies people for taking stalking lightly, unless you're a guy and being stalked. Then it's just sort of funny to everyone. I went to prom with this guy who was like 10 to 12 years older than me. Let's call him Joe. He was the best friend of my friend's boyfriend. My friend, let's call her Jen, didn't want me to go to prom alone, so she set me up with him. Right away I noticed he was off, but I didn't really think about it because I didn't plan on seeing him after prom. Also, my friends didn't seem to notice anything strange about him, and if they did, they didn't tell me about it. By the end of the night he was all over me. He kept telling me that he loved me and that he wanted to date me and be with me forever. Being young, stupid, and incredibly self-conscious, I was sort of flattered. I've never had a guy be interested in me like that. He asked me out at the end of the night, but I told him I'd have to think it over. Apparently he got my number from my friend and started texting me over 100 times in a span of 5 minutes. I've never experienced something like this before or since. He would say hello and then immediately ask why I wasn't answering. Then he'd actually type, "I crying babe answer." I freaked out and told him he needed to calm down. But he didn't stop. He asked to hang out with me and said all these sexual things he wanted to do with me. I told him I couldn't hang out because I had a doctor's appointment. He freaked out. Apparently in his mind that meant I was dying. He asked me what was wrong, told me he was crying and demanded to see me. I called my friend Jen and told her to call him off. As she was doing that, my brother walked in with a very confused look. He told me he got a strange text from someone asking to speak to me. He used my name in the text, asked my brother why I wasn't answering, and if I was dying. I knew it was from him. BC the last text he sent my brother said PLSI crying. I never told him I had a brother, nor did I give him my brother's number. At this point I'm freaking out. I call my friend and ask her if she gave Joe my brother's number. She told me no. Why would I do that? And I explained the situation. She had her boyfriend call him and scream at him for 20 minutes to leave me alone and not to text me or my brother ever again. I blocked his number and that was the last time I talked to him. I did see him again about 5 years later. Apparently he plays baseball with an adult league in my town and he saw me walking into work. He yelled something at me and I ran for my life into my work building. Haven't seen or heard from him since. As a man who had a stalker, I thought I'd share. I was working at a video game store owned by a friend. She was in the Sega aisle. We got to talking and I asked her out. We went out twice and I broke it off. She kept talking about her dad off and other things. I felt she wasn't very mature. and ended it. She proceeded to hang out at my work 24/7. If the mall was open, she was in it. When I wasn't there, she would try to ingratiate herself with all my friends. When I would show up, she would hang around and try to get me back while I was trying to work. It led to her being banned from the store, and I was threatened I would lose my job if she kept showing up. At this point, she started sitting in the mall courtyard, staring into the store when I was working. She then began calling me nearly every 15 minutes. With no idea what to do, I called the police. I was met with skepticism and almost mocked by the dispatcher, who sent a police officer only to appease me after I insisted. The police officer showed up, heard me out, and still did not take it seriously. She called while I was talking to him, and I silenced it. She called again a few minutes later, while I was still talking to him. I sighed, handed him the phone and asked, "Do you want to talk to her? Cause she won't listen to me." He looks at me funny, takes the phone and answers it. I hear her ask who it is. He identifies himself, and that he is an officer of the local police. She yells "Oh balls" and then appears from around the corner on her cell. I point to her. She sees me talking to the cop, and that she is actually on the phone with the police, and she literally runs out of the mall. The cop is now so weirded out that he finally decides to do something. The police issued a restraining order, preventing her from contacting me. It took 2 days for her to violate the restraining order and start contacting me again. I called the police and notified them. She again ran. The police attempted to contact her and her family lied to the police, saying she had left the country to live with family in Europe. At this point the police stopped involving me because it was no longer an issue of how she was treating me, but how she was running from the police. I never did find out what happened to her, but hey, she doesn't call anymore. When I was in grade 1, maybe grade 2. Anyways, early elementary days, I lived a couple blocks from my school. For a while there was this red truck that would sort of follow my friends and I as we walked to the school. I mentioned this to my mom, and she said to ignore the guy. My friends and I would play in the field across from my home, and the same guy in the same truck would stop there to talk to us. I never really trusted people, so I took my mom's word and ignored the guy. Eventually he didn't come around anymore. A little bit later I was eavesdropping on my mom and heard her talking about how her friend and friend's daughter were murdered by some local killer and left in a valley. I never sought clarification on this, but kid me was pretty sure the things were connected. I mentioned this to my mom, and she said to ignore the guy. You must have the chilliest mom on earth. My mom would be staking out the area with a crossbow. I've dealt with 2 stalking situations. The first one is this. I work for the local courthouse, specifically the criminal sector, and most of the clientele that I deal with outside of attorneys is convicted felons and those with small misdemeanors. Anyhow, this girl comes in and is trying to look up some information on her marijuana charge that she relieved X years ago because she needed it for her nursing program. As I'm showing her how to look up someone's criminal history, she kept touching my hand in the mouse. I have a girlfriend and was trying to be respectful, so I'll let her navigate the mouse and I talked her through it. After that, on the way out, she noted my name down on a piece of paper from the nameplate which is on my desk only to add me onto Facebook. I denied her request. Next, she would come around more and more, needing more case information or to randomly get another copy of something, and she'd always ask for me to help her. Next, she waited as we closed to see what car I drove and eventually followed me to my house without me knowing. As it was around Christmas time, I received cards and presents at my doorstep. At this point I contacted her and said that I was getting creeped out and to stop. During the conversation she got bold and started to talk to me like I wanted her, telling me she had this fantasy or that fantasy, talking about this free spirit life that Lana Del Rey has, etc. I told her to leave me alone. Lastly, what tipped me over was this. I have a daughter and she sleeps in her room, and one night I felt something brush against my arm. Thinking it was my daughter coming to my room in the middle of the night, I rolled over and it was her. And the first thing that comes out of her mouth is, "Do you love me?" I immediately called the police and she left in fear she was going to jail. Fortunately, I have never heard back from her since that day. I got stalked for over a year by an old guy. He would follow me everywhere if I went alone. I would see him sit outside my house and school. One late afternoon I asked my next door neighbor if she wanted to walk to the shops with me and she said no. As I was walking but from the shops, he tried to abduct me. He came around the corner in a white van. I remember every mark on it, and as he grabbed me hand he whispered nice anklet. I kicked him in the knee and backhanded him in the face. I ran home faster than I've ever ran before. I felt like I could have ran a marathon. The police never have found him. I caught him outside my bedroom window one night and my clothes kept going missing off the line and shoes. My anklet was never recovered until they got a random tip off and found his house 2 streets away from mine. He had an entire bedroom filled with my pictures, clothes, shoes, anklet, a school painting of mine that went missing from out the front of my classroom one lunchtime. Even my brush that went missing, He had names written down for our children, a wedding dress, and they also found a secret soundproof bedroom hidden behind a wall. It was disgusting and sent me into bad depression and anxiety, which I both still suffer with till this day. It's been 4 years on January the 23rd that just passed. He was never found and I moved towns nearly a state away actually. But I still suffer bad anxiety if I'm home and I grew up with a really bad childhood and I guess I was lucky to know how to defend myself. Dang, that sounds horrible. I'm glad you were able to defend yourself and made it out alright. My driving instructor turned out to have a thing for young girls. I was 16 at the time, and after the incident I refused to book another meeting with him or talk to him. He would then ring the house phone constantly, which happened every day for a week or so. When that didn't work for him, he then turned up at our house all the time knocking on the door while I would pretend no one was home. I then got phone calls on the mobile phone every day, which was a shared one for the family at the time. Both me and my mother lived in fear as the phones rang constantly and he was always knocking at our door. Single parent family. We changed the mobile number. I think in the end we ended up changing the house phone number too. It didn't stop for at least 6 months or longer, and since he was local I would always fear seeing him at the shops or in the neighborhood. In the long run I refused to give out my phone number to anyone and would change my SIM card and get a new number every 6 months. This continued well into uni days to the confusion of my new uni mates. I still get very uneasy getting into a car with just a guy, like a taxi, and have a hard time answering phone calls. I refuse to pick up private number calls and my mother's answer to everything is to change the phone numbers, even though I don't think she can remember why. She's getting a bit senile. Oh man, an interesting thread I can actually contribute to, and I don't know how many guys out there were stalked. In middle school, for my bar mitzvah, we invited some family friends with a daughter who went to an all-girls camp, but they weren't from the area, so we also invited a girl from her bunk, who I'll just call E, for the purpose of keeping her bunkmate friendly, because let's be honest, 13-year-old Josh was not exactly a ladies' man. As it turns out, he already sort of had a crush on me. The girls' camp was the sister camp to the all-boys summer camp I attended. It's an East Coast Jewish thing, and inviting her to my bar mitzvah kind of sent her over the top. For a few weeks afterwards, she called me late at night, forcing me to stay on the phone with her for 3-4 hours at a time, and throwing a fit when I would try to hang up so I could do homework or literally anything else. She would tell me how much she loved me, how much she wanted to talk to me, spend time with me, etc. At first I enjoyed it because hey, a girl was paying attention to me, but quickly I realized that this was not normal. Eventually my parents had to tell her to stop calling me, because I had things to do, and instead she developed a crazy hatred for my mom. She started writing letters, which she would drop in my mailbox. They said things like, I was at your house today and knocked on the doors but nobody was home, so I sat in your yard for a few hours, and things like that. It got to the point where I was literally afraid to see her in public or associate with anybody who knew her, and there would still be the occasional phone call or note, or IM to remind me she was still around. Though things had mostly dropped off by the next summer, having to interact with her at inter-camp events was super uncomfortable. Years later, she did reach out and apologize for her behavior, which I appreciated and accepted. But for a while there, it was pretty screwed up. And if you're reading this, I hope all is well. I swear, Jewish camps harbor the craziest of them all. Source: was a camper at a Jewish camp on the East Coast. Not as bad as some of the stories here, but I had a would-be stalker. I waited tables for a bit and one day this guy got sat in my section. He was maybe middle-aged and he was eating alone. It was slow and I didn't have tons to do, so we chatted a few times. I'm really friendly in general and while waiting tables specifically, so he got the wrong idea and a few days later, he came in again and requested my section. Luckily for me, the hosts at my restaurant had dealt with stalking before and were immediately suspicious that this guy had come in looking for me, and one of the hosts might have even recognized him from the other day. I forget. They told him I wasn't there and then went back to let me know about it. He left when they told him I wasn't there but came back and requested me several times over the next couple of weeks and even called to see if I'd be working, and he was denied every time. The whole restaurant knew and completely shut him down. Eventually he gave up. I felt kind of bad for him because he seemed really lonely and had misinterpreted the friendliness of someone who gets paid to be friendly and didn't really have any concept of how to be socially appropriate in that situation. And telling the story now, he doesn't seem all that bad and it might sound like we overreacted, but it was unnerving at the time that he just wouldn't give it up. They outright told him to stop calling and leave me alone and it took him longer than it should have to listen. And as it was all happening, him visiting and calling etc., the experienced host who had recognized him as a potential stalker shared his experiences with guys stalking the servers at other restaurants he'd worked at. Some guys were relentless. I think they called the police on one. Another story involved a girl hiding in a supply closet when she saw her stalker and having to stay in there for an hour because he wouldn't leave. I forget the details but it was something extreme. Scary. I'm lucky that mine was pretty harmless and wasn't given an opportunity to take it to the next level. My story is a little different than most as it wasn't a man following me because he was attracted to me. Long story short, I dated this guy for about a year and he ended up being an abusive, cheating butthole. His best girlfriend who he ended up sleeping with and thus ending our relationship always hated me as she had been in love with him for a long time. Much longer than I had even known my ex. Anyway, some weird crap started happening when I broke up with my ex and moved to the opposite side of town. My side view mirrors had been ripped up. My roommates had let one of my friends into the apartment because she said she was a good friend and I told her it was okay. She called my employer and started filing complaints. Then one day I got in my car and my windshield wipers were stolen and inside of my car there was a note from her saying if I didn't leave my ex alone she would kill me. I had her number blocked but could pull up the messages on iMessages on my computer. So I ran upstairs to my laptop and there were about 200 messages from her describing my weekly schedule and how she was going to kill me on my way home from work. I immediately went to the police with all of this information only to find out that she has tried to file a restraining order against me the very same morning. I felt like I was taking crazy pills until I showed the officers everything. I was shaking and crying and they went through with the restraining order but I ended up moving 3 states away a couple months later. She then invited me to her wedding about 6 months ago. BB cray. I started law school and this 3L approached me and told me that she was assigned as my mentor. I didn't know any better. I thought that was the school set it up. I didn't have any friend yet so I didn't check with anyone else about this mentor business. Anyway, she said let's go out to dinner and get to know each other better so we went. Frankly, I had a good time and she was pretty attractive. After dinner, she invited me to her place and this is where I started to pick up some weird vibes. I didn't stay long and made some excuses and left. This started about 4 months of stalking. She'd call, accost me in the hallway and in classes, come over and stay for hours. I guess I felt obligated or was too polite because I let her in and she led all conversation to us getting together. I can't say I wasn't tempted, but it's like seeing a beautiful refreshing pool that you want to jump into but not knowing how deep it went. Besides, I usually go the exact opposite way I'm pulled. So I started to ignore her and not answer the door when she came over and she's go from very hostile and very needy and vice versa. One of the worst thing about this was I got absolutely no support from my friends. A girl stealing a guy? Haha, how lucky. Hey, are you banging her? How's she in bed? And the thing was, I also had to laugh it off because even while being stalked and pressured, I felt like I couldn't play the victim because I was a guy. Toward the end, I had to get really nasty to get a day's respite out of her. Nothing violent of course, but I had to literally tell her to frick off. Then after a day or two, she'd be right back as if nothing ugly had ever happened between us. I didn't like that. I'm not saying I was always this perfect gentleman, but I always thought that I was chivalrous. For the lack of a better term. Pretty old fashioned that way. I had never been as nasty as I was with this woman, and it felt dirty. In the end, I had to threaten to go to the dean to get her to stop. I heard she failed the bar. I ran into her a couple of years later at my friend's wedding. We made polite conversation like nothing bad had ever happened between us. I really can't compare to some of the stories I've read on this topic so far, but fairly recently a former SO of mine reached out to me on Reddit under a dummy account to tell me to stop talking about her every once in a while on our relationships when, in respect to folks who are going to a similar situation I found myself in with her. I've had a number of relationships and sometimes I share experiences. Go figure. On top of that, she's been stalking my social media and sent my current SO a message over Ask.fm. How she knows of my current SO baffles us and shows that she's been stalking for the past 4 years. I've shared the messages with close friends and my SO who are baffled by her, as am I. Why does my side upset her 4 years later? Why reach out? I'm not wasting time trying to figure out the mind of a now complete stranger. In the end, I'm not deleting or hiding from my stalker or listening to her same abuse, which nearly crushed me after the end of that relationship. She got that far and that's it. I know she'll see this and rage. Maybe leave a comment. Stalker stranger, I don't know you. You don't know me. Life goes on. Find something productive to do. Copy pasta from another thread I responded to. Get ready for the biggest crap show ever. 2 years ago I started working for my current company, and one of my new co-workers was very helpful when I was in the training process. He taught me tips and shortcuts, which I appreciated. Not a month into my job he started asking me out. I politely told him no. He didn't take it well. He kept asking and asking. He invited me out to dinner, brought lunch for me, bought me Starbucks, asked me what kind of jewelry I liked, left notes when he knew I'd be somewhere. It got freaking ridiculous. I told him no over and over and over. Eventually, the mask dropped. He started cornering me in the break room and stairwells. He once dragged me into a stairwell alone and interrogated me about why I wouldn't sleep with him and if I had something against his race. He started leaving notes on my car and leaving me gifts of alcohol. Then he started waiting for me to get out of work so he could follow me to my car. In each of these scenarios, he'd call me a B, a S, a W, ask why I wouldn't date sleep with him because he was such a nice guy, and why do women only date buttholes? After 3 months of this, he came completely unhinged and had a full-blown literal psychotic break. He solicited me for sex again, and when I shut him down he attacked me and dislocated my thumb from its base at my palm. He was sectioned and sent to a local mental hospital, and management told me he wouldn't be coming back. He came back. I put in for a department transfer after that. He tried to talk to me in the hallway once and I ignored him. He got pee and said I thought I was too good to talk to him. I went straight to management and said if he ever approached me again I'd slap everyone in the chain of command with a lawsuit so fast their heads would spin. No problems since. I still hate having to see his face multiple times a week, though. Jesus. Frick the higher ups at your job. They're almost useless. I'm glad he's no longer your problem. He should not be still working there though. Ugh. I had a stalker for most of my first semester of college. I'm a male, and she was a female. My fraternity had a swap with hers, where members rent out a bar and mingle basically, and I met her there, very drunk, and we made out. She wasn't the best looking, but hey, first semester freshman mistakes. Anywho, she gets it in her head that I really like her. This is not the case. She sends me some very provocative texts which makes me uncomfortable, but I figure hey, she's just another freshman trying to have sex. Whatever. Fast forward a few weeks. Haven't thought much of it. I go to my dorm room and I see someone has tried to break into my room. The dorms didn't have RAs, but there didn't seem to be an entry, so I just brush it under the rug as someone trying to play a prank unsuccessfully. Over the next few days, I start to notice some of my clothes aren't where I left them. Typical guy dorm. Somewhat messy, but I knew where I put my clothes. Again, figure it's just in my head. Now this is where things get weird. The girl I was dating at that time started to get phone calls from a block number a few times a week. The person is saying things like I saw him at the bar last night making out with a girl and he left with her even though I spent most of my nights with her, so she obviously didn't believe her. But then the same dorm situation happens to her as well, but someone went through her stuff and somewhat trashed her room. Now things are getting serious. I don't notice it since my campus was pretty small all things considered. So I saw the girl from the swap every few days at first, then I saw her every day. I noticed I started to see her whenever I left my classes, but just walking out of the building. I'm getting a bit weirded out, but I have no reason to suspect this girl of doing anything. I go back to my dorm and I notice someone has been through a lot of my personal belonging, such as my parents sending letters to me, more sentimental to them, and someone had read all of them. I call the campus police and file a report, and my door is fixed and the tapes are watched, and lo and behold, it's that girl. They go back and watch the tapes from my girlfriend's dorm. Same girl. A restraining order was placed on this girl from me and my girlfriend, and she paid for the damages to my room, and also had to do some community service, but gets off relatively clean. Next semester I move out of my dorm into a house with 2 girls. The first night I moved in we had a party, drank a bit too much and went to my room and went to sleep. I wake up at about 3:30. This girl is in my freaking bed, trying to take my pants off. As I'm drunk as a skunk and can't move very well, I yell and my roommates run in and kick her out, and we call the police. I have not had any encounters with her since. Don't know if this qualifies as a stalker, but as a psychologist I've had many patients take interest. One notable was actually a parent of a patient. She was constantly sending me videos of her kid, email updates, and then just calling to check in. It started getting really weird. She would send me friend requests on FB, and I would deny. She'd try to friend me again. She started asking me to coffee, then lunch. I of course refused every time, and she would get all pissy when I did. Funny part, I only met her once. I wouldn't be able to pick her up out of a lineup. I have no clue what she looks like or even remember our meeting at all. I mean, I meet about 5 new families every day. We met about 5 years ago, and even today every major holiday she emails me to say, Happy Father's Day or Merry Christmas. Some girl texted me to come get her about 2-3 times a day. Started calling me if I wasn't home and yelling at me. Then she started calling from a hidden number and breathing into the phone. Don't know who she was. Had a girl I know call her and say she was my girlfriend. She continued, but I just stopped answering. I have the kind who is just really annoying rather than threatening and scary. I met this dude in college. We would hang out in the same place during breaks and talked a few times. Then I invited him to come out with some of my friends and I for my birthday. He brought a whole present and tried to get me to let him buy all of my drinks all night and insisted that I'll let him walk me home because I lived in a bad neighborhood. I guess my 3 roommates, 2 of them men, 1 of them a Marine, weren't enough protection. He just wouldn't take the hint and I had to tell him very clearly, do not follow me home. That night was kinda weird, so I didn't ever hang out with him after that, but he would follow me around campus. One time he followed me 3 blocks to a food truck during a hurricane and bitched the whole time, insisting that I couldn't really be thinking about walking the whole way there and waiting in the line with all the rain. I had flip-flops and an umbrella, but he ruined his Nikes and hair. I was never sure what he wanted from me. For the first few months I knew him, I was sure he was gay, but after my birthday he started calling me every night after 11 PM. I never answered, so he left me long rambling voicemails saying, why won't you answer? I just want to talk. I don't want anything from you. Can't we just be friends? I eventually changed my number and didn't hear from him for about a year, but then I saw him at the bus stop. I hoped he wouldn't notice me, but he didn't ask for my number again. I told him I was between phones and didn't have a number, but he saw a phone in my pocket and asked, so I made up some stuff about carrying it out of habit and not having a watch. The next time I saw him I had just gotten off a 12-hour shift, so told him to leave me alone. He got pissy and said, you don't seem to like me very much, so I walked home. The next time I saw him he started talking to me about college and jobs and what he thinks I'll do, so I told him he should do what he wants, and he yelled at me that he doesn't want to be homeless and alone. I walked home that day too. I have moved since then. He doesn't have my number or address, so I don't think there's anything he can do to me. I think he's more weird than dangerous. If If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.